Hey, everybody, it's Mark Thompson, and this is the Chief Executive Summit. I'm so delighted to have with me Jacquelyn and Scott, who are the authors of this incredible book, Becoming Coachable, and they are leaders of the 100 Coaches Agency. I just am so thrilled to be a partner and be mentored by the two of you. Thank you for being with us today.
Oh my gosh.
Mark, it is our pleasure to be here. I mean, you have, I since the very beginning of the journey, been a real inspiration to everything that we're doing. Inspiration, more than inspiration, I would say inspiration and guide for sure. Your wisdom and experience has really more than instrumental in creating 100 coaches and who we are. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your leadership and your mentorship. Jacquelyn and Scott, why don't you talk a little bit about what you've been able to start to build and how that leads into the fact that you have a front row seat in curating some of the greatest executive coaching engagements in the world. What is the 100 Coaches Agency?
Sure. You mind if I
Please go
kick
for
it off? So, Mark, as you know, because you were there at the beginning, the journey all began, almost 8 years ago, when Marshall had this inspiration to teach 15 people everything he knew about coaching, because his mentors, the wonderful Francis Hesselbein and Peter Drucker, of course, Alan Mulally, had done that for him. And so he put up a video on LinkedIn, and as you know and can imagine, 12,000 people, now 20,000 people applied to be part of that first little group of 15. But we ran that, and it was hugely successful. We picked 25 people. You were among, of course, that first cohort, and not just in it, but a leader of it. And then over the course of the first year, we did that 4 times, and we became 100. We had this wonderful meeting in DC, and Marshall and I had prepared a 1-hour conversation about why I think we should turn this into a community and what that meant. And as often happens, I had 30 seconds. And so I said, here's what I think we should do. And he said, great. And that was the entire thing. And then we built the brand. And, since then, we've now grown to 400 people in the community. And 3 years in, people started calling, looking for coaches, because it turns out that finding the best coaches in the world is not as easy as you might think, because each of them is their own little brand, and doing their own thing, usually through relationships. Not a lot of exposure, especially the very, very top, sure, but beyond that, not so much. It's also hard to tell the difference between someone who is truly a great coach and someone who knows how to present themselves as a great coach. And here we were, unbeknownst, for different reasons, aggregating the best coaches in the world. So people started calling, and we answered the call. And, for a year, I was just casually matching. And then I realized there's a much bigger white space here. There's something, a need that needs to be filled. Fortunately, met Jacquelyn, and together we built what's now called our curation process, which begins entirely different than most coaching processes do. We start by literally just listening to the needs of the person, right? Usually in a coaching call, someone calls up a coach. The coach is listening to see if this is the right client for me. And then once they decide it's the right client, they're thinking, how do I become the right coach for them? And in our discovery call, all we're doing is listening. Like, who is this person? What do they need? How can we help them? We like to say that we're a relationship first company. And I think this is really a pivotal example of that, where we're not interested in the transaction. We're only interested in building relationship. And then after that, we call them back up and propose 3 coaches to them. And we do it as a call because it's really too flat to do on paper. We want to give them the nuance of why these coaches were selected and what the sort of array that we've selected for them is. And then they have calls with them, and then they pick a coach and off they go. It's an amazing process. And part of what it has taught us is how powerful coaching is. We've probably done literally now hundreds of these interviews, and placed, hundreds of coaching engagements. When it's set up properly, when the fit is right, the change that happens in the leader is outstanding and astonishing. And part of what inspired us to write the book, Becoming Coachable, was helping people understand what it takes to actually enter into the coaching relationship. And we'll talk a little bit about that framework. But I think equally important we were inspired to help people understand that it's not just about being a better leader, right? The whole point of coaching, and again, Mark, I love referring back to you because you do all these things so well. What we see in these coaching engagements is, sure, people become better leaders, but they also become better human beings, because inherent in the whole building of a better leader is the almost the necessity of growing as a human being. And growing as a human being includes how you show up for your employees, but also how you show up for your family. You can't separate those two. And then the other big epiphany that we had is, if we can help more great leaders become greater leaders and better human beings, then really what we're doing is contributing to human flourishing. And that is really the movement that I think we are all engaged in. Is we care about leaders not because we do want to see companies grow. We want them to be more successful. We want them to increase value. But I think over the course of our careers have recognized that all of these big changes and pivots happen at the leadership level.
Absolutely.
And that's really, that's the focus of the agency. That's the focus of Becoming Coachable. The focus of your great work is, how do we help these great leaders become greater leaders and, dare I say, change the course of history. You want to add to that?
Yeah, I sure will. And I'll just say that, of course, there is a growing movement to provide coaching for the masses, for every business professional in the world to have access to coaching. And I think some of the democratization of coaching has been really wonderful. But the 100 Coaches Agency is really focused on the very highest end, the very most impactful leaders, the people who are leading world governments, major companies and organizations, those people that really have those great men and women that really change the course of history and make some of the decisions that impact a lot of us. And so it's just a totally different level of coaching, a different level of access. And to be able to learn from you, Mark, you're one of those coaches at the very highest level. And it's a real privilege to get to work with people who understand in a way that very few do what goes on in those rooms. And we've had the great privilege at this point now to speak with well over 300 executives. And it's really wonderful to learn and to grow together and to be able to support these great men and women behind the scenes to make them just a little bit more effective. Because if they're made just a little bit more effective, it has an enormous ripple effect. And I think it's really our ambition to impact 1 billion people, because we're really aggregating some of these best coaches in the world. And these best coaches then as they become more learned and experienced and more effective, they impact the leaders that they work with. And those leaders impact hundreds of thousands of people, sometimes millions of people in some cases. And so by impacting those leaders, we really are impacting a lot of the world.
Yeah.
And we think that's how it all really creates this ripple effect. A pebble dropped into the pond, spreads the ripples far and wide.
Absolutely. When you think about this notion then of a very great breadth of all types of leaders having impact on nations, organizations, and corporations, thinking about how it's possible for the best of the best to get better, and coming up with this idea of becoming coachable, this notion that in order to be able to have that impact and get better every day and to answer the needs of customers or society, we have to get better every day. And that people who are extraordinary are usually working very hard at having impact and getting more extraordinary in the way they have that impact. Could you talk about the process of this book that you've written about becoming coachable, and perhaps maybe each of you could take on a principle, each of some of the highlights that you feel that speak to you the most?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you, Mark. The days of command and control where the leader is the smartest person in the room, I think those types of leaders are not going to be the ones at the helm for much longer. That really it's a matter of continuing to evolve to ever-changing business and economic and social conditions. And those leaders who continue to learn and to grow are going to be the ones that are the last ones standing. And so I completely agree with you. And that's really the point that we make in our book, Becoming Coachable, is that coachability is one of those key leadership principles that makes great leaders. It's not just about how you get the most out of a coaching engagement. It's how you get the most from yourself as a leader, how you continue to learn, to grow, and to evolve over time. And so we identified these 4 key tenets to coachability, as we call it. And we call them the openness framework, which is being open to change, open to feedback, open to taking action, and open to accountability. And if you are at least open to those 4 things, that makes you coachable. Of course, we all work on becoming more open to all of those things all the time. One of mine that's a personal favorite, of course, is I love feedback. You know, how important it is to continually be asking for and creating an environment where people can offer you feedback. Because so often people have this fear of a leader. You know, they hear your suggestions as commands. And so you hear less and less feedback. They say, okay, sir, right away, sir, rather than saying, I'm not sure that's a good idea. So creating that environment to say, hey, I want to hear your thoughts. I want to listen before I speak. I think that's a really important exercise.
I think the one that I kind of find most fascinating is the first one, open to change. And Mark, you kind of alluded to like great leaders wanting to be greater. And I know, I mean, my big breakthrough for myself, and I see it in so many of these, in so many great leaders, is recognizing that you're never finished growing.
Yeah.
Right. Whatever boundary, whatever you think high is, like as you get closer to it, you realize there's higher. And you don't have to set any limits on yourself. And being open to change, you know, at the low level, being open to change is just recognizing that there are things that you're going to have to change to be a better leader. At the high level, being open to change is recognizing that there's no limit to your personal expansion. And when there's no limit to the leader's personal expansion, there's really no limit to the expansion of the organization, because that's what the leader inspires.
Right.
Why don't you talk about taking action? That's a big one too.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where the rubber meets the road, right? It's not enough to talk about being open to change or even hearing people's feedback, because you can hear feedback and then not act on it. And so action is where you see if you're serious about moving forward or not. And so I think a coach is great at that and great at the accountability piece, making sure that you take the action and then following up with you over and over and over to make sure you keep taking that action.
Right. Accountability is something, Mark, I know you and Marshall and all of us have been talking a lot about recently. The big insight is, you know, you can be open to change, you can take the feedback, you can take action. But if you're not holding yourself accountable, the change isn't going to stick. And it turns out that accountability might have to be a lifetime task. That, you know, I think we used to think, you know, work on your accountability for a year and it's going to stick. And then you'll have made that change for forever. But I think too often, you know, we revert back to our sort of normal bad behavior. And the new insight is like accountability is something we're going to have to work on. It's, you know, like exercise. You can exercise and get to a degree of fitness, and you can never rest.
That's just the drag of going on a diet and starting a fitness plan, right? Once you arrive at that destination of fitness, you never have to do anything again, do you?
Yeah,
so
no.
Therefore, works profoundly and painfully true. That's why Marshall Goldsmith and I are still accountability partners. Every day we do a daily call. It's this little ritual. It takes 30 minutes. Sometimes it's joyful. Sometimes it's always a high point in my day. There's a few times when the rubber meets the road and I realize that I've just fallen terribly behind. And there's this huge correlation between the number of times Marshall and I call each other than when we actually get our stuff done, even when it's our own goals. So having that sounding board, you're tapping into another dimension, I think, of the coaching relationship and vulnerability. And being coachable is, you know, it's lonely. Leadership is perhaps more personal than it's ever been before. It is both an investment of your time and effort and energy and chi. It's a place where you're changing and impacting at the leadership level, especially at the highest levels that Marshall and I work at. You're really affecting sometimes tens, hundreds of thousands of people. That person's life gets a little better. A lot of lives get better, making it even a more profoundly lonely place, a place where you could be needing that sounding board or that sense of safety and that community. Could you talk a little bit about the notion of how you guys became coachable? You make a couple of references to that in the book in terms of this journey where you came to a place where you realized that was the way that continue to grow.
Sure.
Sure. I think for me, a big turning point in my life was when I was on the rowing team at my college at the University of Cambridge. I joined as a novice rower, so I'd never been in a boat before then, and I realized very quickly that I could not do this on my own. You know, there were many girls on the team who were very talented and had been rowing a very long time and had a lot of, again, natural aptitude and strength. And I recognized very early on that my success on the team was going to be determined by my ability to take feedback from my coach. You know, so at Cambridge, it's a narrow river. And so you literally have a coach cycling alongside you with a megaphone shouting things at you in the boat. And they can see things that you can't see. I mean, you can literally only see the back of the head of the person in front of you. And they're constantly giving you feedback. Is the boat balanced? Are you all in time? Are you all putting in the right kind of power between the left, the bow side and the stroke side? And it's the funny thing is, I recognized over the course of that year that I moved up to then be in the women's reserve boat. And I was the only novice rower to do so. But the reason was because I became addicted to that idea of taking the feedback and putting it into action. I know that I did not have the best natural talent there, but I think leaned in and learned how to be coachable. And I think that made all the difference.
That's amazing. Yeah. Growing quickly. This scaling quickly is a theme through all organizations and businesses that we coach, isn't it? That the objective you have is growing very quickly, like the boat getting out in front of you with all the professional or semi-professional rowers. And so we have to scale ourselves at pace, which may be linear or orders of magnitude. And so this idea of scaling yourself as quickly as the business or the organization has to scale is a major theme. I know that you also had a coachability moment that may be right here in the room with us here, Scott. What was your
Yeah, well, so I am the poster child that demonstrates it's never too late to become coachable. Because I went through numerous careers without coaching, not thinking that I needed coaching. Even began running the 100 coaches, seeking out coaching and never finding the right coach for me. And it wasn't until, through working with you and Jacquelyn, that I opened up enough to trust hearing other people, hearing feedback, that I realized that I could really think bigger. That I didn't have all the answers, that I didn't need to hold everything myself, and that I could create the kind of changes that needed to be created to create the organization we needed to create
from the inside out.
From the inside out. And it really was, I mean, the ultimate irony, right? The head of a coaching organization who didn't think he needed a coach. But man, I can tell you, just like we see the stories for everybody else, once I started getting coaching, the exponential flourishing that's happened for the agency and the people around me has just been staggering. Fortunately, I'm devotee of Marshall's and don't look back and think about what might have been. But I'm just so grateful for the coaching that I've gotten. And how, I'd say whenever you become coachable, it's not too late.
Well, I think that's great advice for all of us. And it's an impressive thing to see people who are at the top of their game finding a new way to get better, or they're disrupted and then they have to get better anyway if they want to stay relevant. If I were a chief human resources officer or a person who's running talent management and I was coming to either of you, maybe you could both weigh in with a point around this idea of what should I be looking for in this engagement and in the coach to make sure that I'm in a place where I'm getting what's needed for my particular culture or my particular organization.
At the level that we're at, it's very individual. We see very, very different types of leaders with different needs. The one thing I think that everybody has in common is they need help understanding what expansion looks like. right? They need help in seeing the things that they don't see of what's possible, and also seeing the things that are limiting them from being the fullest self that they can be. And I have to say, a lot of the HR leaders that come to us have a pretty good sense of what some of the problems are, and what they need in a coach for the leader. I'll also say a lot of times they come to us thinking they need someone who's walked in their shoes before. So they say, we want a coach who's been a CEO. Now, Mark, you're unusual in the case that you have been a CEO and you're also a very experienced coach. But too often, somebody who's recently been a CEO is not yet seasoned enough to be a coach. They know how to walk the walk that they walked, but of course, that may not be the walk needed for the person that's getting coaching. So, it's really important to see sort of diversity of experience in the coach, but also working at the appropriate level. The other thing that we do, again, I had mentioned this before, but I think it's so important to repeat, is get an array of coaches, right? You really want 2 or 3 coaches. We happen to like 3, but 2 or 3 coaches who are very different from each other, because in the interview process with those different coaches, you actually begin the coaching experience to learn what it is that the executive really needs from a coach. We think that's critical.
Absolutely. It's common for us to have these calls with HR leaders, and of course, they have a laundry list of things that need addressed, ways that an executive can learn and grow. And all of those are true. And yet, Mark, it's like you and Marshall always say, pick the first thing.
Right.
And sometimes the process is just about uncovering what that first thing is and making sure you have the right support to address that. And then you move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And the next
Although,
thing.
I have to say, I hadn't really thought of this before. And I know, Mark, you've had this experience so many times. That first thing unlocks many of the other things. Like when you figure out what is that first thing needs to be addressed, it turns out that is the thing that needs to be addressed. And then the rest of the things are actually just subordinate to that.
That was perhaps the biggest epiphany I had after doing stakeholder-centered coaching and having such a hard time. I mean, any of us who are ambitious about wanting to make a difference want to boil the ocean in the process. So it's not one thing I can get better at. It's 18 things I have to improve at. And that's obviously too many. And I realized the genius of that focused one that you practice so well and that Marshall taught us. Once having gained so much agency over that one item and seeing the feedback that we've gotten for actually having changed, because people are usually shocks the heck out of people that you can grow and that you can change and that's noticeable. And when having done that one, well, maybe I ought to work on a few other things. Maybe I'll work on items 2, 3, or 8. At that point, it was something that is really opening that heart. As you open this conversation, you were talking about, could you be open to change? Could you be open to the accountability? Well, not really at the beginning. It's a leap of faith. And once having achieved that first set of feedback, realizing I could get better, all of a sudden it's emboldened to get better in so many different ways, which is what's so beautiful about the work that the two of you are doing. It pays itself forward. And it needs to be something that's a practice rather than just an intervention that you're going through. When you think about being coachable and you're thinking about the years to come, just to wrap here, I'd love to have you both share a little bit about what you hope would be different about the future, impacting those millions or maybe that even billion people that you could touch. What are you hoping to achieve with this book?
Oh, man. I think our primary goal that we set out in writing this book is, as Scott said at the beginning, to understand the way that we can create flourishing, the way that we all are so interconnected in ways that we are still only just beginning to understand. And leaders disproportionately have an impact on the world and on their organizations and again, sometimes it's those small moments, those little everyday leadership opportunities that can make a really big difference in people's lives. And when we begin to at least become a little bit more conscious, a little bit more aware of that, then, we can live into those moments and really show up as the leaders that we want to be and create flourishing, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us. An example we give in the book is if you see a field full of flowers, there's not just one flower that's flourishing, it's the entire field. And when all the flowers are flourishing, there's more pollinators that are attracted to that particular hill. There's more life that, is in and out and among that field. And there's just more there. And it's not that one flower is competing with another flower. More for you means less for me. It's no, we're all going to grow. We're all going to flourish together.
Yeah.
Virtuous cycle.
The other thing I'd say is, obviously we wrote this book with the knowledge of, what happens at the highest level of coaching, with the intention that, the people who are leading companies and, leading not only at the top, but there's other levels within the company that people lead, that this book is sort of a Bible to help them understand how to become better leaders, better human beings, and create more flourishing. And I'll also say that this book is for everybody, because the idea of becoming coachable is something that everybody can embrace. Being open to change and feedback and taking action, accountability, that should be part of everybody's daily life.
Yes.
We're couching it in coaching. But the reality is this is what flourishing life looks like. And the secondary, maybe primary reason that we wrote the book the way we wrote the book was because that is what we want to inspire in people. I think we are part of a big movement that needs to happen, that is happening. That's creating, like, this word we keep using, but it's the word we embrace is flourishing.
Yeah.
I feel that sense of empowerment. I feel that sense of flourishing in your words and your actions. It's such a privilege for everyone who has the opportunity to read this book, I think, to learn what it has to share about life. And so I'm so honored to be a partner of the two of you, of the adventure and the agency that you're leading. And I think most importantly now, multiplying that 1,000-fold with this book in the world, being coachable. So watch for that link in our series here. We'll be talking about that book as it continues to have impact around the world, and hopefully inviting both Scott and Jacquelyn to comment on the areas that are resonating the greatest for people. So thank you so much for this, guys. You've done a great job here.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Man, Mark, seriously, we said at the beginning, we'll say it, it's worth repeating. You really inspire us, both in your leadership, but also in your friendship. And it's so meaningful. And I have to say, I would love to say that we're unique in that, but we know that, in the world of pastures of flowers blossoming, you are one of the people who really, put that in motion. So privileged to be a part of that.
Thank you
so
much.
Pleasure and privilege.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you. Hey everybody, it's Mark Thompson, and this is the Chief Executive Summit. I feel so blessed because I have the opportunity to coach the greatest leaders in the world, people who have been aspiring to have impact on developing new movements, new companies, and to build great communities. And the key factor I see in each and every one of those leaders is the ability to be vulnerable to growth in ways that make you a better human, a better teammate, a better partner, a better family member, and a better organizational leader. And the key to that is becoming coachable. That's the title of an amazing new book by some extraordinary leaders. Jacquelyn Lane and Scott Osman are the co-founders of the 100 Coaches Agency, the elite senior leadership coaching organization in the world. And I was blessed, frankly, to have the opportunity to work with them, partner with them, contribute to the book. And they asked me to write the foreword to Becoming Coachable. And we're going to just have a wonderful little reader's theater here. I'm going to take a copy of the book and open to my freshly minted new foreword that I wrote and read this to you and share it with you because I'm just so delighted. It tells you a little something more about the work that I've done and the road that I've taken to get here, which is kind of unusual. So here goes. Becoming Coachable, the foreword. Let's say you spot a volume entitled Becoming Coachable in a bookstore. Immediately, you think of a dozen people who you know should dive into its pages. If only they read the book and thereby became better humans, your life would be easier and the world would be a better place. People at the office, at home, in the airport, if only they could get coached, sweetness and light would be yours. My friend Richard Branson of Virgin has a remarkably deft way of seducing ambitious people to become coachable. Having spawned more than 400 companies, he finds himself in endless meetings and yet always shows incredibly fresh enthusiasm each time. At the outset, he whips out a permanent-looking hardcover notebook and begins taking notes. He asks clarifying questions without sounding the least bit judgmental. What an incredible shock value there is in doing that. The big boss is actually interested in your ideas. How often do you see leaders who matter to us actually appear to be listening? It's not that he's agreeing to everything, but his willingness to engage is hugely motivating to others, and even to Richard himself, as it helps him feel more present. Wordlessly, Sir Richard is modeling what it means to be coachable. If a leader can ignite hearts and minds that way, then imagine what their team might think if they caught them with a copy of Becoming Coachable. What kind of message would you send if spotted reading a copy of this book? Ironically, this is one of those cases where you really should make it about you, because only through your own vulnerable willingness to improve can you ever hope for others to have the courage to do so as well. My friends Curtis Martin and Pau Gasol earned their places in the NFL and NBA Hall of Fame by living that principle as superstars, and they've practiced humility ever since. This is what my colleague Sarah Hirschland, CEO of the U.S. Olympic Committee, and I observe about athletes who become extraordinarily successful business professionals in their second careers. The best leaders are never above doing what they ask others to do. In 1998, the World Economic Forum invited me to interview 200 leaders whose epic careers span decades, from Oprah and Quincy to Bill Gates and Bono, Nelson Mandela and the Dalai Lama. After 2 decades as a board member and a senior executive myself, my adventure in Davos launched my second career as a CEO coach, along with a best-selling book, Success Built to Last, Creating a Life That Matters. Nelson Mandela insisted that I describe leadership as a commitment to coach others to discover their potential rather than focusing only on yours, to inspire people to own the collective journey as much as your own. You're only as good as the folks you can convince to come along. Founder Charles Schwab built his company that way. Chuck recruited me to help create the first online investment firm, Schwab.com. He was the dad I never had, always coaxing me to reach higher. You will fail if you don't scale, he'd admonish. In other words, your job is to grow and help others grow, or you will be left behind by nimbler competitors. To take your game to that next level, coaching is crucial. During her career, Venus Williams has had as many as 4 coaches at once, from experts in technique and conditioning to nutrition and mindset. Venus reminds me of the 2 co-authors of this book, Jacquelyn Lane and Scott Osman, because they've got a great eye for finding exactly the right coaching talent for the right moment and purpose. Even when Venus turned to business, she could not imagine a world without a coach. She insisted that I join her in taking 8 online Stanford classes to further beef up her formidable skills. She challenged me to become a better coach by applying the same obsession she had for excellence on the court, her incredible discipline and values as a human being, and her self-awareness and determination to transform from an individual superstar to a leader of teams. To say that she is coachable is an understatement. Venus never rests on her laurels. Truly successful people never do. My Stanford professor, Jim Collins, opened one of his legendary bestsellers with a warning. Good is the enemy of great. The road to greatness is never a static place where you've arrived as a high achiever. Growth is a practice, not a project. For that reason, you deserve a great coach for every season of your career. A loving critic who holds you accountable, yet withholds judgment. This volume's third co-author, Marshall Goldsmith, calls me every day to check in like an older brother. We hold a half-hour ritual to update our goals, fitness, relationships, happiness, and meaning. It's shocking how much easier it is to give each other advice than to follow it. As Marshall once famously wrote, "What got you here won't get you there." Picking up this book is a step people will notice. When you grow, others follow. Enjoy the book.